When you think of 1970s Britain, what comes to mind? The music blasting out of a tinny transistor radio, the flares, the football, the faces on your television screen every single night. These were the people you invited into your living room, the people your parents trusted, the people you looked up to as a child. What we are about to cover today is not gossip. It is not tabloid speculation. It is not a hit job dressed up as journalism. This is the verified, documented, and in several cases, legally confirmed history of 15 British entertainment figures whose private conduct was a complete and calculated betrayal of the public trust they had been given. Some of these men were convicted in a court of law. Some were investigated and acquitted, and we will be precise about that distinction. Others carried secrets that only emerged after their deaths, when declassified files, independent inquiries, and survivor testimonies finally produced a record that could no longer be buried. This is not a nostalgia piece. This is a reckoning. If you grew up in Britain in the 1970s, Stuart Hall was part of the furniture. He wasn't just a television presenter. He was an institution. As the host of It's a Knockout, the chaotic, beloved slapstick game show that had entire families crowded around the television on Saturday evenings, Hall was one of the most recognizable faces in the country. His presenting style was flamboyant, literary, extravagant. He delivered football commentary like a man performing Shakespeare. He received an OBE for services to broadcasting in 2011. He was, by every available external measure, a thoroughly respectable pillar of British public life. It was all a mask. In May 2013, Stuart Hall stood in Preston Crown Court and admitted to 14 charges of indecently assaulting girls as young as 9 years old. The assaults, involving 13 victims, had taken place over a period spanning nearly 2 decades, from 1967 to 1985. Prosecutors described Hall in court as an opportunistic predator who befriended his victims before assaulting them. The judge sentencing Hall was precise. He told the court that the general public now knew there was a darker side to Hall, one hidden from public view until now, a side which you were able to conceal, taking advantage of your status as a well-liked celebrity. His original sentence of 15 months was referred to the Court of Appeal by the Attorney General, who ruled it unduly lenient. It was doubled to 30 months. Then in 2014, Hall was convicted of further offences, including creeping into a young girl's bedroom during a dinner party, and received an additional 2 years and 6 months. His total sentence ultimately reached 5 years across 2 consecutive terms. The subsequent Dame Linda Dobbs review produced perhaps the most damning institutional finding of all. It was, the review concluded, an open secret within the BBC that Hall had been smuggling girls into his dressing rooms at the BBC's Manchester studios. A senior manager had known of Hall's reputation, the report found, but taken no meaningful action. The BBC's culture of deference to its talent, a culture that had made Hall untouchable for decades, had permitted his crimes to continue for the better part of 25 years. The final victim count, documented through the Dame Janet Smith review, stood at 21 women and girls. The youngest was 10 years old. 21 women, 21 people who had trusted a man their culture had told them was harmless, jovial, safe, and when the truth finally came, they had already been waiting for decades before we continue. If you are the kind of person who believes the full story matters, who believes victims deserve more than a single headline, who wants documented truth rather than tabloid shortcuts, hit that subscribe button right now. This channel exists to go deeper than the surface. Every single time. Hit subscribe and let's continue. Before we get to the case that will genuinely stop you in your tracks. And it is coming. I promise you it is coming. We need to talk about a man who was, in the truest sense, one of the architects of British pop music, Jonathan King. Born Kenneth George King, was a one-man music industry. At 19 years old, as a Cambridge undergraduate, he had a top 5 UK hit with Everyone's Gone to the Moon. He discovered and named Genesis in 1967, producing their debut album. He founded UK Records in 1972, releasing and producing songs for 10cc and the Bay City Rollers. He reported from America for Top of the Pops. He produced the Brit Awards. He was, by any commercial measure, one of the most powerful figures in British music across multiple decades. In September 2001, at the Old Bailey in London, Jonathan King was convicted of sexually abusing 5 teenage boys. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison, placed on the sex offenders register, and prohibited from working with children. He was released on parole in March 2005. What the court heard during trial was a systematic pattern of predatory behavior. King allegedly lured teenagers, boys aged 14 and 15, into his Daimler and Rolls-Royce cars, promising them introductions to celebrities and access to girls. He plied them with alcohol. He gave them records, concert tickets, gifts. He showed them pornographic material. A prosecutor described his methods as classic grooming, building trust, creating obligation, isolating the target. Then in 2017, Surrey police charged King with 18 further sexual offences relating to 9 boys, alleged to have taken place between 1970 and 1986, connected to the Walton Hop Disco in Walton-on-Thames. That trial ultimately collapsed in 2018 due to serious failings in the police investigation, failings Surrey police themselves apologised for publicly. What the 2001 conviction establishes, beyond any legal doubt, is this: Jonathan King was a convicted child sex offender. The boys he abused were 14 and 15 years old. He used his position, his cars, his celebrity access, and his industry power as the precise instruments of that abuse. His talent was real. His power was real. His crimes were real. But if you think a music producer with a Rolls-Royce and a record label represented the peak of calculated access, wait until you hear what the next man built with nothing more than a press release and a phone call. If you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of crime stories, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. Max Clifford was not a performer. He was not a pop star or a game show host. He was something more powerful than either. He was the man those people called when their world was falling apart. For 50 years, Max Clifford was Britain's most feared and most sought-after public relations professional. His client list was a who's who of British and international celebrity: Simon Cowell, David Beckham, Muhammad Ali, Diana Ross. He was the man who broke the story of politician David Mellor's affair. He was the man who sold the Freddie Starr ate my hamster headline to the Sun. He shaped what you read about powerful people. He controlled the narrative. He was, and this phrase is almost unbearably ironic in retrospect, the keeper of secrets. In April 2014, at Southwark Crown Court, Max Clifford was convicted of 8 counts of indecent assault against women and girls as young as 15. The offences spanned the period from 1977 to 1984. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison. He was the first person convicted as part of Operation U-Tree. What prosecutors described in court was a man who had used his London office as, in their phrase, a sexual fiefdom. He lured young girls with promises of acting roles, including a claimed connection to the American soap opera Dynasty. He impersonated Hollywood figures to gain access. He used the most powerful currency he possessed, access, influence, the ability to make or destroy a career, as a direct instrument of coercion. One child protection official called him a ruthless and manipulative sex offender. Clifford denied everything. He called his accusers fantasists. He appealed his conviction. He died in Littlehay Prison in December 2017 of a heart attack while serving his sentence. The Court of Appeal, reviewing his case after his death, upheld his convictions entirely. The presiding judge, Lady Justice Rafferty, described the case against him as strong and dismissed the appeal in full. The man who spent 50 years managing other people's reputations spent the last years of his life unable to manage his own. 3 cases in, 3 men convicted by courts of law. But the next case, number 4, is the one that I'm going to ask you to brace yourself for. Because what Ian Watkins did broke new ground in British legal history. The judge said it himself. And the details are among the most disturbing documented in any British courtroom in the modern era. Stop what you are doing, because this one is different. Ian Watkins was the lead singer of Lost Prophets, a Welsh rock band who sold millions of albums around the world, topped the UK charts in 2006 and commanded arena crowds across Britain, America, and beyond. He was 36 years old. He was famous. He was adored by a generation of fans. He was the kind of rock star that teenage audiences built their identities around. In November 2013, Ian Watkins stood in Cardiff Crown Court and pleaded guilty to 13 charges. Those charges included the attempted rape of a baby, the sexual assault of a child under 13, conspiracy to rape a child, possession of child sexual abuse material on a scale that required GCHQ, Britain's intelligence agency, to decrypt an encrypted drive on his laptop. The storage capacity of that hidden material was, investigators noted, 5 times the size of the entire South Wales Police Force's digital infrastructure. The sentencing judge, Mr. Justice Roache, delivered remarks that had been unheard in any courtroom he had presided over in a career spanning decades. He told Watkins, "What you did plunged new depths of depravity." He was sentenced to 29 years in prison, with a further 6 years on license. What makes this case additionally disturbing is the documented failure of the system around it. Reports of Watkins' behavior had been made to South Wales Police as early as 2008, 5 years before his arrest. Those reports were not acted upon. The independent police complaints, commissioned subsequently, investigated 3 separate police forces over their handling of the early allegations. The password to Watkins's encrypted laptop, when finally broken by GCHQ, contained a phrase I will not repeat on this channel, but it left investigators, seasoned officers who had spent careers in child protection, describing their work on this case as the most disturbing of their professional lives. Ian Watkins died in October 2025 after being attacked by a fellow prisoner at HMP Wakefield. He had been attacked on at least 1 previous occasion during his sentence. There are no words adequate to the documented reality of what Ian Watkins did, only the record itself. What we have seen in these first 4 cases is a pattern of men who used external legitimacy as cover. A game show host, a music producer, a PR guru, a rock star, each one hiding behind a public image that the culture had declared safe. The next man on this list was a different kind of hellraiser entirely. His destruction was not hidden. It was public, celebrated, mythologized, while its victims paid the price in silence. Richard Harris was one of the finest actors of the 20th century, full stop. His Oscar-nominated performance in This Sporting Life in 1963 remains, to this day, one of the most viscerally powerful pieces of screen acting in British cinema history. His stage work was formidable. His recorded music, particularly MacArthur Park, reached audiences who had never set foot in a cinema. His career, from Camelot through the Molly Maguires to his late-life resurrection in Gladiator and Harry Potter, represents a genuinely extraordinary range. None of that is in dispute. What is also not in dispute is what his alcoholism had turned him into by the 1970s. At the height of his consumption, documented accounts confirm Harris was drinking 2 bottles of vodka daily, followed by a bottle each of brandy and port in the evening. Film directors, by multiple accounts, routinely added an entire week to his production schedule, assuming he would be too intoxicated to perform on schedule. His own description of himself, delivered in a recorded interviews, was excessive, compulsive. Everything I do has to be excessive. The damage was not contained to himself. His son Jared Harris, the BAFTA-winning actor, along with brothers Jamie and Damien, participated in the 2022 Sky documentary, The Ghost of Richard Harris. In that film, Richard Harris's own recorded voice describes his behavior in terms that leave no ambiguity. When I drank, I devoured alcohol. When I did cocaine, I devoured cocaine. And when I was in my amorous exploits, I devoured women. The people close to him during the 1970s, collaborators, crew, family, described. A man whose volcanic unpredictability made proximity to him professionally and personally dangerous. Peter O'Toole, who knew him better than almost anyone, nicknamed him the Mixer because Harris so enjoyed creating conflict, igniting arguments, and watching the consequences unfold around him. He was not merely a man who drank too much. He was a man who used excess as an identity and who treated the wreckage left in his wake as someone else's problem to clean up. His genius was real. The cost of that genius was paid, in full, by people who had no say in the matter. Richard Harris destroyed himself in plain sight and called it living. The next man on this list was quieter, more respected, more trusted, and his crimes operated in an entirely different register, one that the British establishment protected for decades, using tools that went all the way to Parliament. There are cases on this list that are uncomfortable. And then there is John Peel. John Peel was, for an entire generation, not just a disc jockey. He was the man who told you what music mattered. He broadcast on BBC, Radio 1 from its very first day in 1967 until his death in 2004. 37-year tenure that no other British broadcaster has matched. He championed punk when the establishment dismissed it. He supported hip-hop when others ignored it. He gave early sessions to bands who went on to define decades of music. He received an OBE. He received honorary doctorates. The BBC named an entire wing of its offices after him, and then they quietly unnamed it. In 2012, as Operation Yewtree began exposing the scale of sexual abuse within British broadcasting, information began emerging about Peel's own conduct. Information that, in several cases, Peel himself had documented publicly in his own interviews and in his posthumously published autobiography. Peel had admitted, in a 1989 interview, to sexual encounters with girls as young as 13 during his time at a radio station in Texas. He had been asked about it in print, and his response was one of the most chilling pieces of casual self-incrimination in the history of British broadcasting. Well, of course, I didn't ask for ID. His first marriage was to Shirley Ann Milburn. She was 15 years old. He was 26. Peel's defenders argued, and continue to argue, that these were different times, that the age of consent operated differently, that his cultural contribution outweighs the questions about his conduct. The BBC, for years, chose to elevate that argument over the experiences of the women he had been with as children. In 2023, the BBC quietly renamed the John Peel Wing. They described it as a navigation exercise. Glastonbury renamed the John Peel stage. They described it as unrelated to campaigners. John Peel was never charged with any offense during his lifetime. He died in 2004. What the documented record shows is a man who acknowledged sexual contact with minors and who operated, for decades, within a broadcasting culture that raised no meaningful objection. His music mattered. His legacy as a broadcaster is genuine. But the full picture of John Peel cannot be told without telling this part of it. John Peel operated in a culture that protected him through silence and prestige. The next man operated in a culture that protected him through something even more powerful, the institutional machinery of British democracy itself. I want to be precise here, precise in a way that this topic demands. William Roache is the longest-serving cast member in the world's longest-running soap opera. He has played Ken Barlow in Coronation Street since the first episode broadcast on December 9, 1960. He holds a Guinness World Record. His colleagues, including the late Anne Kirkbride and Helen Worth, testified at his trial to describe him as a perfect gentleman and a father figure. In May 2013, William Roache was arrested on suspicion of rape. He was subsequently charged with 2 counts of rape and 4 counts of indecent assault, relating to 5 women, all of whom had been 16 or under at the alleged time of the offences, between 1965 and 1971. In February 2014, after a 3.5-week trial at Preston Crown Court, a jury found William Roache not guilty of all charges. He was acquitted. He returned to Coronation Street. William Roache is legally an innocent man. That verdict stands. That verdict must stand. What this case does document, and what belongs in any honest accounting of this era, is the scale of the accusation, the culture from which it emerged, and what it reveals about the climate of the 1970s British entertainment world. 5 women came forward. 5 women who had carried their accounts for 40 years. They were not believed by a jury. That is the legal verdict, and it must be respected. But the women who came forward also deserve a record that they existed, that they spoke, and that the system heard them and reached its conclusion through due process. This is not a conviction. It is a context, and context matters. A man tried and acquitted by the legal system. That is how the law works. But the next cases reveal something different entirely. Men who were never tried at all. Men who were protected not by juries but by governments, by intelligence services, by the people who were supposed to protect the public from exactly this. Cyril Smith was not a television presenter or a rock star. Cyril Smith was a member of Parliament. He represented Rochdale for the Liberal Party from 1972 until 1992. He was known nationally as a jovial, larger-than-life, political character, at his heaviest weighing over 29 stone, a regular guest on chat shows. Beloved in his constituency, knighted in 1988, he was Mr. Rochdale. He was a pillar of the establishment. He was also, by documented evidence, gathered by multiple police forces across multiple decades and subsequently confirmed by the Independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, a serial abuser of vulnerable boys. The evidence trail begins in 1970. Lancashire police carried out an investigation into Smith's behavior at Cambridge House Hostel in Rochdale, a residential establishment for boys, where Smith was a trustee and regular presence. Detectives compiled an 80-page report. A senior officer wrote that Smith had used his unique position to indulge in a sordid series of indecent episodes with young boys, and the become of it. A report was ready to be acted upon, and then it was locked in a safe at Special Branch. The Director of Public Prosecutions declined to prosecute. It was later established that the DPP's office had lied to the media about its knowledge of the allegations. MI5 knew about the DPP's false denials and took no action. In 1981, Smith was arrested during an undercover police operation that had caught him on hidden camera at a sex party involving teenage boys. He was released from the police station within hours. The investigation was shut down. The evidence was confiscated from the officers who had gathered it. Margaret Thatcher, the independent inquiry found, was told of the allegations against Smith before awarding him his knighthood in 1988. She chose not to question him. Smith died in 2010. He was never prosecuted. The ICSA confirmed he had abused boys at both Cambridge House and Knollview Residential School. A former detective superintendent who had investigated him in 1970 described him as sheltering, behind a veneer of respectability. That veneer held for the entirety of his life, maintained by police, by prosecutors, by MI5, by Parliament, by the Prime Minister herself. If there is a single case in this video that demonstrates what institutional protection of a predator truly looks like, it is this one. If you are still watching this, if any of these 8 cases is still in your head, right now hit that subscribe button, because this is what we do here every single time. We do not skim. We do not summarize. We go into the details that other channels skip. And I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Which of these 8 cases hit you hardest? Which one are you still thinking about? I read every single comment, and your answers shape what we cover next. Cyril Smith was protected by the state. The next man was protected by something even more intimate, the loyalty of the woman who had more power than almost anyone in Britain. Peter Morrison's story demonstrates what happens when the protection comes from the very top. Peter Morrison was MP for Chester from 1974 to 1992. He was a junior minister. He became Conservative Party deputy chairman. He was Margaret Thatcher's parliamentary private secretary, one of the most trusted positions in her government. He was knighted in 1991. He was, by every credential, a man at the absolute center of British Conservative power. In the mid-1980s, 2 separate sources approached senior Whitehall officials with reports that Morrison had a penchant for small boys. A formal investigation was carried out. MI5 officers questioned Morrison. He denied the allegations. They were accepted. A 1986 letter from Sir Anthony Duff, head of the Security Service, to Cabinet Secretary Sir Robert Armstrong noted there was no threat to national security but acknowledged the risk of political embarrassment to the government. The allegations were not reported to police. 4 years after those allegations were formally noted by MI5. 4 years, Margaret Thatcher appointed Morrison as her parliamentary private secretary. The independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, examining witness testimony and declassified documents, subsequently heard Evidence that Morrison was discovered with a 15-year-old boy at Crewe railway station in the late 1980s, former resident of the Bryn Estyn care home in North Wales, told Channel 4 News that he had seen Morrison visit the home multiple times and drive away with boys. The Labour official who had knowledge of the allegations in Chester told the inquiry, "A lot of people knew and a lot of people did nothing. It was a Chester cover-up. Nobody was going to break ranks." Former Conservative Cabinet Minister Norman Tebbit was asked on the BBC's Andrew T. Marr show about the culture of cover-up. During this period, his response was remarkable in its bluntness. "You didn't talk about those things." Morrison died in 1995. He was never charged with any offense during his lifetime. Thatcher did not question him. The party did not investigate. The police were not told. MI5 filed it under political embarrassment and moved on. The children at the care homes did not move on. "We have spent time with politicians, DJs, rock stars." The next case is entirely different. It is the story of a man whose tragedy was genuine, whose talent was extraordinary, and who used both as instruments to make the people closest to him disappear. Brian Epstein died in August 1967 at 32 years old. His death by accidental drug overdose came at the moment his world was most precarious. His father had just died. His contract with the Beatles was uncertain, and the life he had built, the extraordinary, unprecedented empire he had constructed, from a Liverpool record shop and a group of scruffy, working-class rock musicians, was shifting in ways he could not control. He never lived in the 1970s, but the world the 1970s exposed, the world of hidden lives, institutional silence, and identities that could only be expressed in darkness, was his world entirely. Brian Epstein transformed the Beatles from a regional act into the most famous band in human history. He negotiated the Ed Sullivan deal. He secured the Parlophone contract when every other label had said no. He built an entire management empire. He was genuinely the fifth Beatle, not as a cliché but as documented fact. What his personal record shows is a man living under conditions of enormous psychological pressure that the culture of his era made almost unbearable. Homosexuality remained illegal in England until 1967, the year of his death. Epstein was gay, something he kept rigorously hidden, navigating a world of constant risk, of arrest, of blackmail, of public destruction if discovered. He was arrested for impersonating an officer while cruising London bars in a uniform a tailor had made for him. He was blackmailed. He was subjected to violence. He carried all of it while simultaneously managing the most scrutinized, creative enterprise in the world. His biographers and his own children describe a man who sought relief in amphetamines to keep going and barbiturates to sleep, who fell into depression of extraordinary depth, and who had almost no one he could trust with the full reality of his existence. The tragedy of Brian Epstein is not scandal. It is exposure. Exposure of what the British establishment of his era demanded from men like him. Total concealment, total performance, and total isolation. He was not given the option of honesty. And the cost of that impossibility was his life at 32. Brian Epstein paid with his life for a secret the culture forced him to keep. The next man on this list paid nothing and made the people around him pay everything. Mick Jagger has never been charged with a criminal offense. He is not a convicted man. He is one of the most famous musicians in human history. And the Rolling Stones' body of work requires no defense from this channel. What is documented in Marianne Faithfull's own autobiography, Faithfull, published in 1994, and through the historical record of the Jagger-Faithfull relationship, is a story of psychological destruction that cannot be separated from the power dynamic at its center. Marianne Faithfull was 18 years old when she entered the world of the Rolling Stones. By the time she was 23, she was homeless, anorexic, and addicted to heroin, living on the streets of Soho. By 30, her previously melodic, singing voice had been permanently destroyed by the combination of illness and drug abuse from that period. Faithfull's own account in her autobiography describes a relationship in which she was systematically managed, her public image controlled, her career subordinated to Jagger's priorities, her personal deterioration occurring in proximity to a man who had every resource available to him and chose how to deploy them. The miscarriage of their child at 7 months pregnant is documented in the historical record. The subsequent collapse of her mental health during the early 1970s, when she was largely invisible to the public and largely unreachable to the industry that had once promoted her, is also documented. What Faithful's account specifically describes is not merely a failed relationship. It is the account of a young woman who entered a world of power with no protection, whose deterioration was witnessed by people with every capacity to intervene, and who emerged from it and eventually, through extraordinary resilience, as a more significant artist than when she entered it. Her 1979 album, Broken English, remains one of the most extraordinary comeback records in British music history. Marianne Faithfull died on January 30th, 2025, at 78 years old. Her story is not Mick Jagger's alone to define, but in any honest accounting of the damage that power inflicted on women in 1970s, British entertainment, her story belongs in the record. You have seen Freddie Starr's name in connection with this era before, if you follow this channel, but the full picture has never been covered here. Today that changes. In the 1970s, Freddie Starr was considered one of the most unpredictably brilliant comedy performers in Britain. His improvisational energy was electric. His physical comedy was exceptional. He was the kind of performer whose presence on a variety show was guaranteed to produce something that no one in the production had anticipated. Backstage, multiple accounts from crew members and collaborators during this period describe a very different atmosphere, not one of creative excitement, but of sustained fear. Starr's documented behavior towards staff included physical violence, striking crew members when a prop was incorrectly placed, or when a joke failed to land during rehearsal. Multiple accounts from that period describe these incidents. His eccentricity, celebrated publicly as the mark of genius and was used internally as a shield against consequences that would have ended any less powerful person's career immediately. In 2012, following the emergence of the Jimmy Savile scandal, allegations of a more serious nature were made against Starr as part of the Operation U-Tree investigation. He was arrested 4 times in connection with the inquiry. He was never charged with any offense. He was not convicted. What places Starr's case on this list is not conviction. It is the documented pattern of the era in which he operated. The backstage culture of British variety television in the 1970s, as established through the Operation U-Tree investigation and survivor testimony, was one in which access to young fans was systematically weaponized. Starr operated at the center of that culture, at its peak commercial moment. Freddie Starr died in May 2019. His story is incomplete without the full picture of the world he moved through. And that world is now documented. Lord Louis Mountbatten, the first Earl Mountbatten, of Burma, was among the most significant figures of the 20th century. Supreme Allied Commander in Southeast Asia during the Second World War, last Viceroy of India, Chief of the Defense Staff, mentor to Prince Charles. He was, by the royal family's own description, an elder statesman without equal. He was killed on August 27, 1979, when the Provisional IRA detonated a bomb aboard his fishing boat at Mullaghmore, County Sligo. He was 79 years old. The declassified FBI files, released in 2019 through a Freedom of Information request, reveal something the establishment had suppressed for decades. American intelligence officers began compiling a dossier on Mountbatten in 1944, after his appointment as Supreme Allied Commander. The file describes Mountbatten and his wife, Edwina, as persons of extremely low morals, and contains a direct account from a confidential informant, American author Elizabeth, Baroness de C, alleging that Mountbatten was a homosexual with a perversion for young boys. The files are intelligence documents, not criminal convictions. They are allegations, not proven facts. That distinction must be stated clearly. What followed those files, however, was not allegations. In 2022, a survivor named Arthur Smith, a former resident of the Kincora Boys' home in Belfast, waived his anonymity and initiated legal action in the High Court of Northern Ireland, claiming that Mountbatten had abused him twice. During the 1970s, while he lived at Kincora Boys' Home was closed in 1981 after 3 men who ran it were convicted of child sex crimes. Multiple survivors and researchers have subsequently linked the home to a broader network of abuse involving figures from the British political and intelligence establishment. The Historical Institutional Abuse Inquiry, led by Sir Anthony Hart in 2017, found no conclusive evidence of a state conspiracy involving Mountbatten specifically. What it did find was a system that had failed catastrophically to protect vulnerable children. The MI5 documents handed to the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, the declassified FBI files, the survivor legal action, the documented connection between Mountbatten and Jimmy Savile. Savile remained close to the royal family, particularly Prince Charles, until his death in 2011. These are not a conspiracy theory. They are a documented record that demands examination. Lord Mountbatten died a national hero. He was assassinated by terrorists. His military record was genuine. His service to the crown was real. But the files exist. The survivor spoke. The court case was filed. And in any honest reckoning with the 1970s British establishment, his name belongs in this conversation. Jimmy Tarbuck was one of the defining comedians of British television across several decades. His tenure as host of Sunday Night at the London Palladium established him as one of the most familiar faces in the country. He was warm, accessible, professional, and enormously popular with an audience that spanned generations. In 2013, as part of the Operation Yewtree investigation, Surrey Police investigated allegations of historic child sexual abuse against Tarbuck. He was interviewed under caution. The investigation proceeded for several months. In September 2013, the Crown Prosecution Service announced that there was insufficient evidence to charge Tarbuck with any offense. No charge was brought. No prosecution followed. Jimmy Tarbuck is legally an innocent man. That is the factual record, and it must be stated without qualification. What places this case in this documentary is not a verdict of guilt. It is the same context that places Bill Roache's case here, the documented reality that in 1970s, British entertainment, the environment around these figures was one in which allegations, when finally brought forward decades later, were both credible enough to investigate and, in legal terms, unprovable across that span of time. The investigation happened. The record shows it happened. The outcome was no charge. That is the full picture of Jimmy Tarbuck, the comedian the public loved, the investigation that produced no conviction, and the unanswerable question of what the distance of 40 years does to justice. And now we come to the final case. The case that, in terms of documented evidence, institutional protection, and the sheer scale of what was hidden behind, one of the most respected names in British public life, may be the most chilling on this entire list. Marc Bolan was the king of glam. Rock T-Rex, Get It On, Telegram. Sam Metal Guru, he was 22 years old. When he put on a top hat and a feather boa and invented a genre, he had a magnetism that the television cameras could not contain. He was beautiful, strange, and utterly original. He was also, by documented account from those closest to him, a man whose private conduct toward the women in his life was a consistent and documented pattern of psychological cruelty. His relationship with his long-term partner, June Child, documented in biographies of Bolan and in accounts from the period, describes a dynamic in which his rising stardom was matched by rising emotional volatility, mood swings, episodes of contempt, and a casual disregard for the psychological well-being of the people in his orbit. When he formed a relationship with American singer Gloria Jones, who became his partner and the mother of his son, the documented accounts from those around him in the mid-1970s describe a man who had concluded that fame exempted him from ordinary human decency in his personal relationships. Bolan died on September 16, 1977, when the car driven by Gloria Jones struck a tree on Barnes Common in London. He was 29 years old. Jones survived, seriously injured. Their son Roland was 18 months old. What the historical record of Marc Bolan establishes is not criminal conduct. It is something the original script for this channel described precisely for other subjects. A man who had concluded that his talent exempted him from ordinary human decency. His music endures. His cultural legacy is permanent. But the women who moved through his world at its height carry a different kind of record, and that record belongs in the full picture.